one of the key things you should be looking at when you're looking at your scan rate is what percentage of your ewes are barren. And the target there should be less than 3%. And look, if the figure is higher than 3%, you need to look at why. And what I'd find there over the years, the biggest factor is body condition score.
Hello, I'm Kieran Lynch and welcome to OviCast, the Teagasc Sheep podcast. Each episode will bring you insights, advice and technical updates for the sheep industry. Now in this episode we chat to Teagasc Advisor Edward Egan about how to make the best use of our scanning results. Edward shares insights from over a decade working with farmer discussion groups to help them use their scanning data more effectively to monitor flock performance. He discusses both the short-term actions that can improve outcomes immediately and the longer-term management changes that can enhance flock productivity over time. We also explore some of the trends and patterns Edward has observed over the years. Edward, a lot of flocks around the country will have completed scanning over the last couple of weeks, or certainly the later lamb ones are completing at the moment. You, for the last number of years, have been working with your groups and looking at the scan rate in them. Maybe tell me a little bit about what you've been doing with those.
So Kieran, yeah, look, going back to 2016, so going back nearly 10 years, I think it was the start of STAP, I started sending out a survey there to I suppose, look, discussion group participants and to clients, just to look at their scan rates. And the reason I was looking at scan rates there was, look, it's a great reflection of how the breeding season went. So what I actually do is I send out 2 pages to clients. So look, what would have went out there, say a week ago, would have been the first page is the 2025 scanning results for mature ewes. And the reason I look at mature ewes is I want to compare one year, with a previous year. I want to compare maybe one farmer with another, or let a farmer understand how he compares, to another farmer. And if you're looking at mature ewes, you're comparing like with like. If some farmers would be breeding ewe lambs, some farmers don't. That's why I wouldn't look at the ewe lambs. I just look at mature ewes. The other thing I would do there on the survey, look, I suppose, in general on the survey, what I go back and look at there is, yes, how many ewes are barren, how many singles, how many twins, how many triplets, how many quads. And then we use those figures then to assess, look, what the breeding for performance of that flock was like. On the second page that I send out, it's actually for the number of lambs that were successfully reared in 2025. So what you'll have in there will be lambs sold as pets, lambs that were, consumed by maybe the farmer himself, and then lambs that went to the factory, and then lambs that were sold as stores, and lambs that were reared as replacements or kept as replacements. And what I'm trying to work out there is, look, if I compare the scanning rate, look, if I take an example there of 100 ewes going to the ram in the autumn of 2024, and if they are scanned then in December 2024, and they scan carrying 180 lambs, those 100 ewes, including barren, then I can see that the scan rate there for those ewes is 180. And then what I would do is I'd get the number of lambs successfully reared in 2025 and say, that figure comes to 150, for example, then I can see that 30 lambs were lost. And it's a means then of looking at what the lamb mortality figure was for that crop of lambs that were produced last year.
It's a useful follow-up, Edward, that we probably don't reflect back on. Like, look, the scan really, to an extent, it sets the maximum number we're going to have for the year. So it does. But I like your idea there, that follow-up, well, where did things go wrong? And maybe highlight issues that we don't often see on farms.
Look, it does. And looking at scan results this year, look, I'd find scan results this year, they're on a par with last year. Look, some farmers will be up, some farmers will be down. I think the most important thing to do is to actually sit down and look at your own pregnancy scan results for your own flock. And look, from looking at those figures over the years, look, what we found was that the average scan rate, for the average flock is 180. So 180 lambs per ewe put to the ram. Okay, that's the average scan rate. And the bottom 25%, their average scan rate was around 1.6 or 160 lambs per 100 ewes put to the ram. The big thing that stood out for them was the number of ewes that were barren, typically around 5.5%, 6% barren. And then if you looked at the top 25% in terms of scan rate, their scan rate was around 2.05, 2.1. And I suppose the big standout thing for them was their barren rate was around 2%. And I think, look, one of the key things you should be looking at when you're looking at your scan rate is what percentage of your ewes are barren. And the target there should be less than 3%. Okay, and that's what a farmer should be looking at. And look, if the figure is higher than 3%, you need to look at why. And what I'd find there over the years, the biggest factor is body condition score. Okay, and what a farmer should do really is, if he has take his barren ewes, put them into a pen and look at them. And what are they telling you? And very often I find that you could break barn ewes down into maybe three key groups. One is how many of them are hoggets that lambed as ewe lambs? Okay. If a lot of them are hoggets that lambed as ewe lambs, it's maybe a reflection that, look, you just didn't get them back into the condition that they needed to be in going to the ram the second time to maintain, to maintain that scan rate. Okay, so then you just have to look at the management of ewe lambs. The second group I'd find there would be the thinner ewes, and there are a lot of thinner ewes in that batch. And if they are thin, why are they thin? Okay, are they thin because they didn't get a chance to put on condition? Are they thin because they're lame? Are they thin because there's an underlying problem? Are they thin because you're keeping a lot of older ewes? And I would just find sometimes, and it's happened maybe in recent years, because of some of the schemes that are there, a small number of farmers might, they might tend to keep more of the barn ewes, than they would have in the past, simply because they're trying to keep their ewe numbers up for the scheme. And look, that is a false economy.
Like, I think you touched on something interesting when you made your comparison. The higher end flocks, obviously less barn ewes, higher litter size as well. Overall, ewe condition managed that bit better than the ones maybe at the very other extreme at the 1.6, where they're just struggling that little bit more. Maybe not the same effort that's gone into getting them into that condition early on. It's the two polars between the two extremes in it.
Look, it is, and look, it goes back to basics there. If you want a high scan rate, you have to have a low barren rate. If you want a good scan rate, look, body condition score is key, and that's about weaning your ewe early enough, divide them into groups, 8 or 10 weeks before the ram goes out, and allowing those thinner ewes to put on condition, and the ewes that don't put on condition, culling them. That is the key part. The other part that is also key, look, I'd find a rigorous culling program, maintaining a reasonably high replacement rate year after year. That's key as well to maintaining a young flock and a flock that's in good condition.
No, that's a fair point. It gives you the option to cull more. Look, we focus there on the ewes and condition. Obviously, the other part, Edward, that can feed into that is ram issues, particularly if those singles are maiden or that going on. You'd like to think you might have picked up on some of them with just management practices earlier, but it might also highlight an area to focus a bit more on for the following year as well.
Look, again, yes, if the scan rate is below par, if the barren rate is high, go back, look at all the factors, body condition score of the ewes, but also the body condition score of your ram, and then look, I suppose the other key thing is, yes, single sire mating is always risky because, look, you're leaving all of the work up to one ram. It's a bit of a gamble. You should have maybe 3 rams out at the one time with your ewes.
Look, we touched there on some of that kind of short-term action. I suppose, Edward, the other big thing comes out of it now is make use of that scan information. Really, from a nutrition point of view, we need to get our splitting done early and start looking after our multiples, particularly our triplets, early on, and possibly some of those thinner ewes as well.
Yeah, and look, I suppose it was another question I asked in the survey. I asked the farmer, what date was the ram put out? Because I'm trying to work out what is their lambing date going to be. Okay. The other question that they're asked is, what date did you scan the ewes? And look, what I did find was that on average, some farmers are scanning ewes about 7.5, 8 weeks before lambing. And really what you want to be doing is scanning ewes about 9 weeks before lambing, and which is about day 85 after the ram has turned out. And look, what that does is it gives you enough time then to go through your ewes, sort them out. So you've 9 weeks, sort them out into their different groups based on so you can pull out the barren ewes, obviously. You're not going to be feeding them meal, but you can, pen them according to litter size. So you'll have your singles, your twins, your triplets, and if you have quads. And then the other thing you could do as well, or you should do, is if you have a thin single, put that thin single in with the doubles. If you have a thin double, put it in with the trebles. And the other thing that should happen, I suppose, in association with scanning is you should test your silage, because look, if you take it that maybe the average silage on average DMD on sheep farms is somewhere around 65, 70% DMD. A ewe that is a thin twin ewe or a ewe carrying triplets, that ewe needs to be fed meal on average quality silage maybe 8, 9 weeks before she's due to lamb, and that's why it's important just to scan early enough to facilitate that.
We're touched there. You've covered the short-term actions, longer term, and you've discussed some of this. But if we're looking at as a business, that sets a maximum number of lambs for the year. Longer-term actions, Edward, like you've monitored some of these flocks over a number of years, and some are quite happy, maybe sitting at that 1.8, 1.9. Others at the 1.6 have room to improve. Some of that is touching on the body condition score and that management changes. Some of it is touching on breeding. that just doesn't happen overnight either in terms of those longer term actions. You really need to put a conscious effort into improving your scan.
Yes, and one thing that I suppose that surprised me about the scan results was if you look at an individual flock, by and large, they're very consistent from one year to the next. So if a farmer scans, I suppose the way I would put it is, if you looked at the bottom 25% for scan rate, it'll be the same farmers. If you look at the top 25% for scan rate, it'll be largely the same group of farmers. And I suppose what that is telling me is that, look, if you carry out the same practice year after year, you'll get the same scan result. And so, look, I mean, if you want to improve your scan result, you need to change your management practices. That is the key thing. And the way I would look at it is, look, any lowland yoe, your Suffolk cross, your Texel cross, those ewes are capable, those mature ewes are capable of achieving a scan result of, up around 1.9. And then if you want a higher scan result than that, or if you want a higher litter size than that, then what you're looking at is using maybe a Belclare cross or something similar to that. And I suppose that's where you have to look at it. What is your target and how are you going to go about achieving that? The other thing is, look, the first thing a lot of farmers need to improve, rather than changing, the type of ewe, say the breed of ewe they're using, first thing to look at is your management practices. And look, the one key thing there is body condition score. That is number one. And number two is a rigorous culling policy, so that you are removing those ewes that you've given a chance to put on condition, before the mating season. You've given them a chance, they haven't put on condition, there's some underlying problem, culling those off. That is absolutely key.
Edward, look, I suppose you mentioned part two of your sheet that goes out really reflects back on what happened in the previous production year. Just maybe touching that again, like as I said at the beginning, it's probably the one aspect of this we don't actually reflect back on. Well, how many did I sell out of last year's crop? No harm to reflect back on what happened there, and particularly before lambing, is there anything we can do to cut down the mortality levels?
Well, actually, one of the key things that came from that survey for me, one of the things that stood out is that the flock that had the lowest lamb mortality was the flock that had, I suppose, a high level of supervision at lambing time. And the flock that had the highest level of lamb mortality around lambing time, that was the flock that had a lower level of supervision at lambing time. So, look, supervision at lambing time is one of the key things to reducing lamb mortality. Look, I suppose one of the things we did was we used the results. If you have your ewes scanned in autumn 2024, say you scan 100 ewes in autumn 2024, and you've 180 lambs in those ewes at scanning time in December 2024, and then you record how many lambs then you successfully reared through 2025. You can calculate two things from that. You can calculate your weaning rate, and you can calculate how many lambs died. Because if you can see that, at scan time there was 180 lambs, at weaning time there was 150, then you can work out then that obviously 30 lambs died, and 30 lambs out of 180 is something like 17% lamb mortality. So it's a simple way of going back and just calculating where your lamb mortality is. Another thing farmers should look at just around lambing time, how many ewes actually did not go out with a lamb or did not successfully rear a lamb. And look, that would be a reflection maybe of two things. One is there abortion there? Is there an abortion issue there that is leading to ewes having, failed to produce lamb? And the second thing then is ewes going out without lambs or not taking to their lambs, refusing their lambs. It could indicate maybe an issue then with nutrition around lambing time as well.
Something that's very worthwhile going back and look at. Again, a couple of things there worth reflecting back on for a lot of flocks. Maybe look at how is the flock performing and what little changes can we make within it.
Look, absolutely. But look, go back, look at your scan results for your own flock. What are they telling you? Barren rate, less than 3%. That's the target. For most flocks, most lowland ewes, they should be able to achieve a scan rate of 1.9. If you've the more prolific breeds like your Belclare cross, you should be scanning 2.1. The other thing then, go back and look at the ewes that are barren, see can you work out why, and then, look, use the scan rate to work out your lamb mortality. It's a simple way of trying to work out lamb mortality. And then, look, I suppose another key thing, it highlights the importance of good supervision around lambing time. And I suppose, look, the last thing I would say is, look, when you scan your ewes, try and scan them around day 85 after the ram has turned out. It gives you enough time then. It gives you about 9 weeks to get your feeding right then before lambing.
Address any potential problems. Look, Edward, good update. Thanks very much for coming on.
Thanks, Kieran.
We'll leave it there for this week's episode. Look, if certainly timely information at the moment, both on those short-term actions we can put into effect, looking nutrition and other aspects of it, as well as some of that longer-term strategy to try and improve flock productivity. That's it for me for Updates on our Sheep Programme. Keep an eye on our Twitter page at Teagasc Sheep. I'm Kieran Lynch. Thanks for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe or follow us wherever you get your podcasts.